So I'm an artist, I'm a writer, and also an art teacher. Um, I I think myself in this way that if it wasn't for colonialism, I would have been a seer. But yeah, I'm a multimedia artist, work with all sorts of materials, but I have, done paintings, drawings, and, performances and multimedia installations. I have written poetry, but I also, publish in academic journals. I teach in the sculpture department at Virginia Commonwealth University here in Richmond, Virginia. Yeah. My work is driven by the urgent issues and ideas that I have at the moment. So the ideas define or determine the materials that or the shape that the work takes. It's getting it's more embodied now because it's materials, my body, my writing. It's three-dimensional kind of outlook. Yeah, but it reflects on my experiences as a migrant, as somebody who moved, from Malawi, now living in the United States. So my experiences, as a yeah, as a migrant. But I also, like to think about my work as reflecting on the politics of aesthetics, using the aesthetics of politics. There's a specific example of an artwork that is done that which I call the Patois bourgeois party, where I borrowed wholesale the language, the aesthetics of parties, political parties on the African continent, but Malawi to be specific, and used that, to shape my own artistic practice, but also to reflect on my experience as a neoliberal, being immersed in this neoliberal art profession. It's hyper, it's challenges to hyper produce, to be hyper visible, and so on and so forth. So yeah, reflecting on the politics of aesthetics, art politics, by using the art that is used to, in political parties and so on. Yeah. Definitely, yes. So, my training as an artist was traditional. Yeah, it started with, learning the skills, the basic skills of, the traditional art making skills as a draftsperson, as a painter. Did some, basic, sculptural, this is starting from secondary school, what you call secondary school. From secondary school to university, I studied art, and, I am good at, this basic, I am good at drawing, I'm good at painting, but at some point, reflecting on my practices, I decided to radically, shift from, what I had been doing to other things that challenged the way of, my way of making and doing and thinking about my work. So rather than just making beautiful images or objects, I was seeking to intrigue, to perhaps think about beauty in other ways. So, like for example, I challenged myself to make work that, the most non-sellable work, to make artistic statement using, through the most non-art forms. And, this, made me lose, some of my audiences who had been used to certain ways of, making, that they had been used to, my old styles, my old materials and forms. So yeah, it was like you know, you would say this is a process of de-skilling for me, but it was also a process of opening up new horizons. Yeah, but you know, a lot of people misunderstood what I was doing at that time, at a conceptual level, but also in terms of the structural aspects of the work. Yeah, but it was like, for people who knew what I had been doing before, they knew that I had, I was an artist. I had, the capabilities to make, that kind of work, But for people who were meeting me at the time that I was undergoing these transformations, it was like, you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. So that misunderstanding of but the work has also been misunderstood in other ways. Like for example, I had perhaps this is one of those works that happened at that moment of transformation. I called it Passages for the Undocumented in Houston. So I went out with cardboard signs. So the work was just text on cardboard signs and me performing in the street as borrowing from the panhandlers on the streets of Houston. So people misunderstood. People who are used to seeing panhandlers in the streets just saw me as one of them because I was dressed like a panhandler. I looked like like my body as a black man on the streets of Houston. People make assumptions. So people gave me money even before reading what I had written on these cardboard signs. So yeah, misunderstanding at so many levels, conceptually, materially, but also just, ontologically, just encountering the work, in out there in the streets and not knowing what it was, But for people who read the signs, meaning was at another level, Yeah. Yes, so I have, tried and I keep trying to expound the boundaries of meaning making in my work in terms of like seeking other audiences, particularly audiences which I think the work might make more sense. The conversations might be more meaningful. So like going beyond the confines of the gallery to have conversations with people out in the streets. Like for example, in the work that I mentioned, the Passages for the Undocumented, was out in the streets of Houston and encountering people who might not, there are people who go to art museums and galleries, but also people who might not, spend most of their time in, with this kind of art making. So, but I've also made other, kinds of works with a collective in Malawi. We call ourselves Ozope Collective. It's five friends who we have made work on the shores of Lake Malawi with the fishers there. So, just responding to the environment, the ecosystem of the lake, and making work in conversations with the fishers, but also in the broader Malawian society at large. So, the work has taken on, has been on multiple platforms, multiple audiences. It has even reached, like conversations in academic journals. So it's like an expanded practice beyond, the normal art audiences. Yeah. Articulage, yeah, yes. So the concept of articulage is a way of looking at the flexible elements in assemblages, in my own assemblages, but also in other artists' assemblages. So like artists that I'm constantly looking at, and my work having been in conversation with, but it focuses on an assemblage, is a combination of heterogeneous materials, but really it is focused on the materials and the elements that enable or enhance, flexible assemblages. So how different materials are articulated in assemblage. This emerged in 2019 after I had had my exhibition titled "The Sea Harms Bearing Gifts, Strange Gifts." So in the exhibition, I had it was an installation with a series of assemblages of frames of luggage bags connected to baby cots. But they're connected with what we call mpira in Malawi. Mpira is rubber straps created from rubber tires. So, the rubber tires or the tubes of rubber tires are cut in ways that are, these elastic strips. So, I was thinking about that elasticity in connection to home, my position as somebody who is living away from home, but how I am psychically connected to home. But yeah, so Articulage, I was thinking about how these elements were articulated in these assemblages, But then, thinking about articulation and assemblage, but also, assemblage now, if you're thinking, broadly, it's not only just physical objects, if you're thinking in terms of, like Deleuzian terms, it's, cities are assemblages now, The conversation we are having right now is an assemblage, But thinking about what ties, what ties this conversation? Perhaps, for example, in this instance, language would be that flexible element that's tying this assemblage, But I was also reading some Marxist theory here, through Stuart Hall, So Stuart Hall elaborates this concept of articulation, how, for example, politics is articulated to the economy, or the base is articulated to the superstructure, and how these, they are flexibly, linked to each other, connected to each other, but how also they shape each other, So I was interested in that flexibility in how different elements, at a molecular level, it would be at a smaller, minute micro level, would be my work, different assemblages, different elements, but also at a larger scale, thinking about all these, social, theoretical issues. So yeah, articulage stemming from assemblage, but also from articulation as expounded by people like Stuart Hall. Yeah. Yeah. So the articulage reflects on some of my my recent artworks. It's a multifaceted kind of. I have perhaps 3 or 4 different practices, going on at the same time. But articulage is one. Perhaps I could refer to my This is one of the most recent work. So this is just thinking about the lamp, the hurricane, the paraffin or kerosene lamp that I grew up with in the home, back home, where, blackouts are regular, but you have this household item that's always available, handy, It used to be that, maybe things have changed now, but it used to be. So I think about the lamp as an element, as an example of an articulated assemblage, it's an example of articulage in a way how in a way how, so the glass is connected to the frame, but also the wick is connected inside. Flexibly you can easily articulate and disarticulate this object. But I grew up as a kid marveling at this object, looking at it in the home, playing with the lever and removing the glass and so on and so forth. So I'm now coming back to it and just, playing with it and, enhancing. I used to look at them as human beings, as anthropomorphic forms. So I am just enhancing that, playing with that, and disarticulating and rearticulating that as an example of an articulated or articulage process. So yeah, this is an ongoing project. I'm hoping to bring it out soon. It's already started to seep out. So for example, in conversations like this one. But Yeah, but I'm also working on what we call Chewanese films in Malawi with the Ozope Collective. So we have gathered a collection of films that this is an industry that is emerging in the townships in Malawi, where young people get Chinese films, like kung fu films, maybe Chinese films, Hollywood films, or Bollywood, from India, and they translate them into Chichewa, and so they call them Chewanese, perhaps because predominantly it's the Chinese films that that dominate. So we have been looking at this, studying them, and just the Chewanese filmmakers decontextualize through translation. Things are lost, but also there are new things introduced into the films. They become something else, speaking to the local audiences, and like as an entertainment for the youth in Malawi, subaltern youth in townships. So we just responding to them and adding our own layer on top of these Chewanese films and making our own clips. So that's another another facet of our work. The other a project is what we call the raw project, the lecture project that I referred to earlier on. So yeah, we have been in the southernmost tip of the Lake Malawi. We have also been at the center working with the dugout canoe, making interventions, sculptures, with the dugout canoe, just to speak to issues of the ecosystem, extractivism, and a host of other issues, connected to the livelihoods of fishers on the lake, but also, livelihoods in Malawi as a whole, because we depend on, we are all connected to this lake, but, globally also, you start to think about, climate change, the Anthropocene, racial capitalocene, and all these other important issues, urgent issues at the moment. So yeah. What are my views about art and its institutions and society? If I might reflect on contemporary art at the moment, I think it is still, even despite all the critique that it has been, that's been charged at it, it's been exposed to, I think it is still largely elitist. It is still largely in the service of the rich and the upper classes. We make work, we deposit in its institutions, and for the enjoyment of the bourgeois elite. And you see at openings, this is who comes to art exhibition openings. It's usually the those who are accustomed to its languages, its practices and habits. Yeah, after the day of the opening, only the gallery is empty. It's just the work and and the people who work at the gallery. Nobody comes to see the work. It's largely maybe a few people trickle in, and that's it. But if we judge it in terms of who goes to see the work at openings, it's usually the bourgeois elite. So yeah, art and its institution at the moment, still there are artists, intellectuals challenging, pushing the boundaries, trying to extend the conversations beyond the confines of art institutions, but it still somehow ends up within those confines. Yeah. Not to devalue all the gains that have been made in expanding, in expanding the languages of art making, expanding its reach, but it's still largely a domain of the bourgeois elite. I think, I think the art world should address its, structural inequalities, the inequalities that deeply structure, how it operates, how it is, whilst at the same time also being at the forefront to honestly challenge the inequalities in broader society that have been exposed by the global pandemic. So many, the art world is opening, institutions are opening, but you still see that it's becoming business as usual. We're going to see mega stars in museums and galleries, and so yeah, inequalities in the art world, but also, well, it should be at the forefront to dealing with issues of the environment, unequal distribution of the vaccines, who is being exposed to the transformations that are happening due to climate change, growing poverty, all these issues that are urgent at the moment. But I don't think the art world would be able to, particularly art institutions, artists, art teachers, intellectuals in the art world, are working to, confront these issues. But institutions, I'm talking about galleries and museums and any other, granting, like funders and if inequality structures the way they think, they will not be able to address the inequalities out there so it's they have to look within to be able to address issues that are address these urgent social issues. Yeah. I value work that is this is value for me, value in art for me is work that is self-reflective while also being critical of, the social, like making interventions into the social, but also making interventions and pushing the boundaries of art making, So it's a kind of a double-edged sword, So I value art that is pushing the language of art making in terms of materials, in terms of the shapes that it takes, the forms that it takes, or in terms of how it challenges how we see art or think about art, but also at the same time, it is also making critical interventions into the social. It might not have to be necessarily out in the wild, but however it does that, it is looking internally at art, at how, how art is in questioning and pushing that. Yeah, collaboration has been a way of, challenging my own practice, the individualism that lies at the core of my practice as a, or you could say a bourgeois, professional artist. So challenging that, one way has been to, to see what it means to, to have my voice contributing in creation processes with other artists, and how that can strengthen the artistic vision. So yeah, I have made work with a collective. Ozope Collective is yeah, that's the only one that I have made with so far. But I've liked how it has expanded. This collective, making has expanded, the horizons of art making for me, because, each one in the group brings their own strengths. So, they bring their own views. So, the work is multidimensional, is stronger, has layers, of textures, because there are many voices bringing in their own, nourishing the work. But yeah, beyond working with those au pair, while still working with those au pair, we have collaborated with fishers, like having fishers, contribute in the art making process. These are what you would call in the art world non-art publics. There is creativity beyond the art world. So you know, they creatively express. So borrowing from their own forms of creative expression, but inviting them to contribute in our work has nourished and tremendously positively impacted how I think about my own practice, and the lengths and breadths that can take. So yeah, collaboration has been instrumental in expanding and strengthening my work. Not really, not really. So far, my work, showing has been just finding a space and showing, but not in other countries on the African continent. We participated in a festival just recently, submitted work, and perhaps that's one instance where we showed, but to say the truth, really, the contemporary art world pretends to be global, but it is really nationalist, at heart, at core. It's really you could say a nationalist endeavor, in the sense that Kenyan artists, Kenyan writers who write about Kenyan artists, Kenyan curators who curate largely. There are a few instances, but generally, Nigerian curators who curate Nigerian artists, Nigerian writers who write about Nigerian artists. South African, it's the same with South Africa, So, if you're coming from a place like where I am from, where there is nobody who is writing about contemporary art, and you sit or you stand on the margins of the arena and you watch your colleagues dance, it's I wish there were Pan-African platforms, or curators, intellectuals with a Pan-Africanist outlook. We had examples, perhaps, in the personages of people like Okui and Wezo. We're waiting for, another, Okui and Wezo or other. I wish we would have 10 or 15 Okui and Wezos, or perhaps BC Silvers, but yeah, we're still waiting for such kinds of. There are, a few instances here and there, but it's largely a nationalist endeavor. So, which I understand, there are structural or infrastructural difficulties. Perhaps funding might be an issue for, say, artists in the western part of Africa, connecting with those in the east, or those in the south. There are a few instances, maybe in South Africa or maybe in Nigeria or Senegal, with perhaps what is happening at raw material. But yeah, you can count a handful, but these are still even limited. Largely, there are infrastructural problems, but largely it's also ideological. Perhaps we need to be more ambitious. Yeah. Yeah, I value art that rebels, that questions the norms, that rebels from the social norms, that expands, seeks to expand the boundaries. But I think it should be accompanied by experiments in other ways of being. So it's not just rebellion for its own sake. You know, it's rebellion, but it's rebellion that also gestures towards other horizons. You know, I'm thinking of Fela Kuti, for example, as an artist, as a musician who was a rebel. You know, who this is for an obvious example. He was a rebel. You know, in his music, in his art. You know, but he also experimented with ways of being, with how he wanted his world to be, you know, in the form of the Kalakuta Republic, you know. It was a commune where, this is where, how he wanted to live, you know, how he wanted, you know, a country in which he was to be, you know, had to be, you know, the freedom that he wanted elsewhere, you know, he had to practice it, had to experiment with it, starting from, you know, where he lived. So yeah, otherwise, if it's just rebellion for its own sake, it's just gonna be, you know, bourgeois avant-garde, you know, then it congeals or falsifies as a, you know, another form of art for art's sake. You know? Yeah. I'm thinking about network, you know. I think, you know, to be connected, to people who share, you know, your visions, your ideas, your ways of being and ways of thinking. Yeah, I think that's a, you know, a powerful resource, you know. Yeah, so but you can extend our understanding of network to say, you know, to be able, at a material level, to be able to be connected to digital networks, for example, digital networks that help you to be connected to others who think in a way that you think. Because there are certain places where, you know, making the kind of work that I make, you might be isolated, you might be alone, and you know, other than being branded as a mad person, you know, that's it, you know. But when you are in conversations with people who have an idea, you know, what you're saying, what you're thinking, and what you're aspiring to, you know, I think it nourishes the artist. It, you know, helps you grow. Yeah, so to be connected to a network that is, to supportive networks, to nourishing networks. That's, yeah.